The year was 1997. Gygax was doing his own thing, and Lorraine Williams held control of TSR Hobbies along with all of its properties. Things looked pretty grim for the company. Loads of debt, corporate mismanagement, and the heart and soul of the company had laid down his sword. Lorraine Williams seems like a villain at this point, but in all honesty, that's just business. She was smart. She saw an opportunity and she took it. She did run the company for 11 years, so clearly she at least understood how to run a business. And it was thanks to her that balance was restored to the company, and several of the most prolific works of TSR Hobbies was produced during this time. It was under her reign that the Forgotten Realms setting came into fruition. Thankfully, Lorraine Williams did the fans of the game a service. She knew she didn't know too much of the game, and knew it had to go into the right hands. This is where our heroes, Wizards of the Coast, arrive on a white stallion, trumpets blaring, a choir of angels behind them, and $30 million in their pocket. Yeah, in 1997, Lorraine Williams sold the company to Wizards of the Coast. In case some of you aren't aware, Wizards of the Coast is the same company that made Magic: The Gathering, and at this point they had a lot of knowledge about how to make a good game under their belt. Wizards of the Coast is also the reason TSR Hobbies was on the brink of collapse because Magic: The Gathering was stealing so many of their customers that TSR Hobbies had crippling layoffs and couldn't keep up with the new competition. And this was the beginning of the D&D Renaissance. In the year 2000, Wizards of the Coast released the 3rd edition, yet another revamp to the rules, but they did something smart with it this time. They saw the issues with Dungeons & Dragons at the time and decided to let the players revitalize the game by making the game rules open source content. That meant anyone could use the rules to make their own spin on the game, and it was totally legal. This gave control of the game to the players. After 3 years, they created version 3.5, which was under a closed license, meaning they took it away from the players, which you have to expect. There's no way they could do anything with the game by letting the fans make free content.
I will tell you that I really enjoy how Wizards of the Coast has been handling Dungeons & Dragons now, definitely. Because I do know that when 4th edition was coming out, releasing a lot of books, they were releasing Player's Handbook 1, Player's Handbook 2, 3, and then DMG 1, 2, and so on. So they would release these expansions for each of them. Like, if you were a new player coming in, you would just look at all these books and it was like really overwhelming. While they still release the supplements and stuff like that for 5th edition, you only need the core rule books to play this edition. You just, like, the Player's Handbook has a ton of material, and the Monster Manual and the DMG, and I feel like they've done a better job at making a base game that a lot of people can play, because in the 4th edition, when it was coming out, I remember getting into it, and we thought we needed all the books.
In 2008, Wizards of the Coast tried releasing the 4th edition, but the common complaint is that it was designed too much like a video game, and doesn't give too much room for players to properly roleplay. Out of everyone I talk to, it's nearly unanimous they all passionately hate 4th edition. The reason it feels like a video game is because they literally designed it with MMORPGs in mind. This was during the time World of Warcraft was gaining traction and Wizards of the Coast was paranoid that it might mark the end of Dungeons & Dragons.
The first edition of Dungeons & Dragons that I started playing was 4th edition, which is, it's a very unusual time to be kind of getting into the hobby because really it wasn't as big of a hit with players a lot. Older players 3.5 didn't really like it, so a lot of times when I'm talking to people and saying like, oh, I came on during 4th edition, you either have, you know, people who came on in 5th or 3.5, so it's interesting there. As far as my opinion on that edition, like what are the different strengths and weaknesses, kind of difficult. It's one of the problems was that when we had first gotten into it, you know, we were still struggling. This is all so new to us. We're trying to learn the rules and stuff. And so it's very difficult for me to actually judge 4th edition objectively. But I will say that looking back, there are certain glaring problems with it and certain things that it does fairly well. I think that it really tried to be kind of tactical and figure out like what powers do people have fun playing with, and I think that it was in 4th edition that they really kind of nailed down sort of the tactical aspect of it and thinking about like what powers do people enjoy and figuring out the different balance of how do we have these players who have these radically different characters and how do we make characters that everyone, you know, enjoys playing. 4th edition, they were really starting to kind of experiment with that. They also brought out the trained system where it's like either you were trained in something or not trained in something. And if you were trained, you got a certain bonuses, and if you're not trained, you just didn't get that bonus. And so it was a way of kind of simplifying the math and making it easier for people. And I think that that was something that they did that was really helped to streamline the game. And then when they brought it into 5th edition, I think that was a good idea. Some of the weaknesses on the flip side, I'm not a huge fan of skill challenges. It's one of those things that works on paper, you know, this idea that, ooh, we're gonna set it up and we're gonna go through all these, we're gonna have this challenge and we're gonna have to give the players a bunch of different options and they're gonna pick these different options and we're gonna make sure that every single skill comes into use and it's gonna be balanced and stuff like that. And it's one of those ideas that works really well on paper and it just doesn't play the way you think. A big part of it is because normally when people would resolve skills, they would just roll a die and like, ooh, add the bonus and then this thing happens. But in skill challenges, it was like, okay, you're gonna be building up towards a certain success and everyone has different things they can roll, and if you succeed at this skill, then it does this thing, and if you fail at this skill, then it does this thing instead. In practice, it was very kind of slow and sluggish, and it meant that the GM had to stop and read through a lot of material. It just didn't play out the way you think, and so I was not a huge fan of the skill challenges. And they actually, what's funny is that a lot of modules have actually reincorporated skill challenges in 5th edition.
In 2014, Wizards of the Coast decided to look back at every edition of Dungeons & Dragons, take what the players loved, left what the players hated, and created 5th edition. And so far, people don't hate it, which is great seeing that they have to bounce back from the backlash of 4th edition. Strangely, Dungeons & Dragons became very popular again. It's hard to really pinpoint why, so everything I'm about to say is purely my own reasoning, so bear with me. In the early 2010s, we saw a revolution in geek culture. Suddenly, movies based off comic books were major box office hits. People realized all the stuff that nerds had been bullied for all these years was actually seriously cool. Now the nerd stigma went away. Before the comic book movie era, Star Wars brought the nerd community and the common folk together with one of the greatest spectacles in entertainment history. The Lord of the Rings movies made everyone realize that these books are actually some of the coolest things you'll ever read. It took a few decades, but everything that geeks loved no longer needed to be hidden away. People were proclaiming their geekiness at this point. Then there was a search for other cool stuff that nerds liked. That eventually led to people discovering and rediscovering Dungeons & Dragons. Celebrities were talking about how they used to play the game.
I am Colder the Witch Hunter, the 800-year-old immortal.
TED Talks and psychological research was being put into how the game positively affects social development.
Into a fantasy world where I could be someone else. Someone with power, someone with control, someone with agency. And I played these games obsessively through my childhood. And then I stopped. And then 25 years later, I began to play again as a 40-something, more or less grown-up adult male. And I realized something. These games were important. These games shaped me. These games gave me incredible tools, a coping mechanism to deal with my situation at the time.
Now the fear of demonic possession was washed away.
Personally, I think the way that it's influenced me is it's really got me to sit down and think about social dynamics. And that's something that unless you're like playing in a group over and over and over, it's a lot harder for me to think about. But the more and more I play D&D, the more and more I think about the different social situations where someone's sending signals where they want something, but they don't want to tell another person something because they don't want to be contradictory. You know, there's a desire to not be contradictory. There's a desire to maybe not take charge, or if someone wants something, they just don't come out and say it. They say things and kind of like, oh, do we really need to be doing this? You know, or something like, there's another language that people use. And I think that coming into D&D over and over and over, every single week really makes me think about it on a regular basis and take that in consideration. When you're talking about like the gaming culture, I think that D&D has really codified the importance of choices and decision making and social aspects, and it has boils down that experience to just its base level of you just have some choices and how people interact with each other. Yeah, definitely D&D is way more accepted in kind of today's culture than it was when it first started. And I think part of it is because people are more familiar with it, or you have more friends who you know who do it. Even then, you got to understand from like an outsider's perspective, hearing about role-playing and stuff, the entire concept of pretending to be a character for fun is like really weird. It's almost considered like a mental disorder, like, or some kind of like schizophrenia or something. You know, they're pretending to be someone else. They think they're someone that they're not. Like, I think I'm Frederick von something something of Prussia. And so if you were to tell someone like, I'm Longwind, the Elven Warrior, like, how long has Elfwind been in your life? Oh, I've been playing him for like 5 years. On and off. Okay, thank you. So it's almost seen as, I think when the hobby was first coming out, there were all these negative connotations because of, once again, it was almost seen as kind of like a mental disorder or something. But it's a weird hobby, like really, because it's one thing to be playing a tabletop game or a board game or chess or something, and that's something that's easy to describe to people. It's like, oh, I play this tabletop game. It's like, oh, have you ever played chess? It's kind of similar to that. Like, everyone's played chess, and so they understand the concept of I am commanding these different pieces on the board and moving them around. But the idea of getting like emotionally invested in it, where a character, someone like a pawn goes down, it's like, no, Horatio! And it's funny because there's so much emotion behind it. Like when you're playing a Dungeons & Dragons game, because a character gets shot, and there's an actual literal reaction that the players have, and sometimes that gets translated into a character where one time we were playing and someone's like magic sword got broken. He's like, no, not my magic sword! And he was like flipping out about it. And one of the players was wondering like, is that in character or out of character? And I said to him, I actually can't tell. I don't know, because there's actually a big gray area between what we do in role-playing, where these events are happening in the game and they are emotionally impacting people, and sometimes the emotions are real. Like, if something spooky happens, like, whoa, I'm creeped out, that's not the character, that's the player. And because the emotions are real, that's something that we enjoy about the hobby. But you gotta understand, like, that's weird. That's really weird to a lot of people.
What created a noticeable boom in popularity is the famed Critical Role campaign from Geek and Sundry.
Hello, everyone. And welcome to tonight's episode of Critical Role, where a bunch of us nerdy-ass voice actors sit around and play the first game of our new campaign in Dungeons & Dragons. Super excited to be back. I've missed this.
The internet only made sharing homebrew content and campaigns easier. Then theory was being shared about Dungeons & Dragons. WebDM devotes an entire series just to answer major topics about the game after several years of experience.
Hello there, willing participants. I am Pruitt, and this is Jim Davis. Now, at your table, fireballs might make you gag, and you may not be into thorn whips, but you don't have to be a Dorian about this, because it's not 50 Shades of Greyhawk. So with your willing, participate. Enthusiastic consent.
Words are betrayers.
Those letters. They're slippery bastards.
Deceitful letters.
XP to level 3 created content to make getting into the game more approachable.
So you're gonna play Bard, the charismatic, enigmatic, ecstatic, fanatic, diplomatic, dramatic, with those lunges super tired, pragmatic. You've been magical since birth. You give your companions a sense of self-worth.
Dungeons & Dragons wasn't scary anymore. In fact, it's slowly becoming cool. Dungeons & Dragons was so influential throughout its entire life, there's been several attempts at copycats. Some of them were blatant rip-offs trying to capitalize on its popularity, while others were fans that legitimately wanted to contribute to the content of the game. The most successful being Pathfinder, which is based off the 3rd edition rules and was made to be an extension to those rules. Eventually, the publishing company behind Pathfinder started mimicking certain elements of Dungeons & Dragons, making their own novels, monster manuals, modules, etc. But that's a story for another time. In the end, Gygax tried publishing fantasy novels during his time away from the company, and none became widely successful. Every game he tried to make was either sent a cease and desist by TSR Hobbies, or was sued to the point where they couldn't continue. Gygax ended up dying in 2008, and Dave Arneson died in 2009. Wizards of the Coast even helped fund the Gygax Memorial in Geneva, Wisconsin. But their legacy lives on in worthy hands. And though the course of events was rough and difficult to swallow, it teaches us that something worth doing comes with danger. Whether it's a battle on the ground or a battle in court, the real question is if you're willing to fight. And Gygax fought. He fought his friends. He fought his co-workers. And he fought against his family. He wasn't a perfect human, but he is forever idolized in the game we play and the connections we make.